In 2003, I was in the Spokane County Jail. Well, I walked in and let me walk out. It was a ministry thing I did. But this passage we're going to look at Galatians today was key to my day in jail with one man and an inmate that I met there that day. And this one of these verses we'll look at today is why he's in the kingdom, because of what's going to be said here. It's just powerful. So if I get to tell you the whole story, I'll get to that maybe at the end, but let's take a look and see what it is. Verse is probably the most popular section of Galatians, frankly. It's pretty well known. But for him, he had never heard it before, and it was like water to a thirsty, dying man. So let's take a look. Today, we're still in Galatians, and the entirety of this passage is going to be about two different fruit trees. You've got what looks like a pretty healthy, right kind of fruit tree, and then you've got this tree that's got this weird-looking dark fruit on it. And his contrast today is going to be totally on the difference of the fruit of these two trees. Now, remember, I told you last week that by their fruits you'll know them. That's used a lot locally and in many contexts. It's one of the most popular phrases about fruit in the Bible that anyone knows. But the point of what Jesus is trying to get at with that is that the fruit that grows on your limbs is a natural result of the DNA of the inside of the plant. So grapes don't come off of apple trees and vice versa. The fruit will tell you the hidden nature of the plant itself, of the being. And Jesus was saying, if you want to see the hidden true nature of people, look at the fruit that naturally grows on their branches. And then you can tell. And we'll talk more about the fact that people try and put false fruit on. But he's going to talk about two different fruits today because of this. And you want to be on the left tree and not the right tree. Okay, so let's take a look and see what he's talking about. The one on the left is a tree based on the spirit. He'll say it in just a second. And the one on the right is based on the flesh. Let me see if I... here we go. 16. This is where we're starting, Galatians 5:16. So you hear it in his voice. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desire of the flesh. For the flesh sets its desire against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, for these are in opposition to one another, so that you may not do the things that you please. But if you are led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. So he's going to contrast these two trees right now and talk about the fact that these two trees are in opposition. They don't go toward the same goal. They're basically two different DNAs. There's the tree of the Spirit, and then there's the tree of the flesh. Now, when I say flesh, I'm not talking about this stuff. And what we're talking about is what you can do in your own human nature. What you can do, for instance, if I inspired you enough to go home and do something wonderful, like clean the house before your wife got home. It's not going to happen with me. But if I could be that inspirational, and I'm not, and you say, yes, I'm going to go home and put all my effort into cleaning the house. When you said all my effort, you just spoke in the flesh. It's basically, so his catchword for everything you can do by your own willpower and strength, that's the flesh. So what he's saying on the right is that there's this tree that if you try as hard as possible to do because you're going to accomplish the thing, then you actually come up with sort of nasty fruit. But if you are running instead by the Spirit on the left, you get good fruit. And these two are in opposition. And the reason they're in opposition is because these two trees create different fruit for different purposes. The Spirit creates fruit for a certain purpose, but the flesh creates fruit for a different purpose. And actually, the two purposes are who benefits. The tree on the left benefits God. It's to serve God. The tree on the right is to serve you. And that's what he's going to get at. So we're going to pick this apart as we go on. These are in opposition to each other. Well, so then the question remains, then how do I make good fruit? How do I make sure that my fruit is the left fruit, the Spirit fruit, or the flesh fruit I want to get rid of? I don't want to have part of that. So how do I do good fruit? And he told us in this passage in 16. So you walk by the Spirit, and you won't carry out the desire of the flesh. Now, he said this earlier. He said, what we can do in life is we can make a list of do's and don'ts. That's the law. That's legalism that he's been railing against all the way through this. We can make that list. And we can say, well, how do I ensure that I don't do the stuff on the right tree? I'll make a list and make sure I put all my effort into not doing it. And you just heard, based on my best efforts. But we all know that even though you know the right things to do, you know the things you try and avoid in the right fruit, you still do it. And there's a captivity issue. There's a bondage to sin that's that's there because our nature, we as a tree, are made to make bad fruit. And that's the bad news. So what do? Do we try and find good fruit to stick on us? No, we walk by the Spirit. We walk by the Spirit. So basically what we do is we pursue the Spirit in our life in every juncture that we come to. And as we pursue the Spirit, as we walk by the Spirit and with the Spirit, then guess what? All the fruit on the right doesn't happen in our lives. Now, some of it pops out in a while because at that moment we're not walking with the Spirit. But when you're walking with the Spirit, he says, you won't carry out the desires of the flesh. Two different things. It's exactly the best illustration in the entire Bible is in Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he says, not my will, but yours be done. Because the tree on the right is my will. The tree on the left is his will. So when you walk by the Spirit, and we'll talk more, when you walk by the Spirit, you're saying, Lord, what do you want right here? Where are you leading me right here? How do we do this through your power? It's not coming up with a list. Now, you can try and do a list, but it won't work. Paul says in Philippians, in chapter 2, verse 18, for it's God who is at work in you, and watch this, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. That red fruit on the left are those things, or those works in that sense, good things. So he's saying the issue is not you coming up with a list of what good fruit looks like and doing it. He says that God himself is at work in us to do two things. To will, that is to actually want it and pursue it, and then actually to accomplish it. To will and to do his good pleasure. So again, walking with the Spirit is about coming to the Lord and saying, not my will, but yours. Right now, what is it you want in this situation? I want you to be reflected, your Spirit in me to work its way out in this situation. I don't want to put my best efforts into it, or this is going to be a train wreck. I want you to be glorified here. And as a result, what happens is in every context, God's glorified because you will end up doing and saying things that you probably would not have ended up doing and saying because his Spirit is actually working through you. And people will say, gosh, that's brilliant. Where did you get that? And you say, that's the Spirit speaking to me. And in fact, Dorothy and I talk about this all the time. When we talk to people and we're listening to the Spirit, and we want God to live through us because he's in us, and we're having a conversation, often as we relay the conversation afterwards, like at dinner, I'll say, well, I was with this person, and I found myself saying this, which is a way of saying, I don't think that came from me because I wouldn't have chosen to say that in a million years. But I found myself saying this. Almost you can stand back and say, wow, I'm as encouraged by that as the person who heard it, but I can't take credit for it. I don't know where that came from. I do know where that came from, the Spirit in us. So this is a backbone truth of the New Testament and the Old Testament, which is the Spirit lives within you, and then as living in you works its way through you, and you glorify God and not yourself. And that's what he's getting at right here. Walk by the Spirit. He says, here's the alternative. We can go back to our list. Living by the list, this is the legalism that we've been railing against for the last couple months. You can make a list of the do's and the don'ts. Can you see what the tiny print says there? It says, lots of stuff to do that's worthless. Okay, so that's the law list. And what you do is bring up that list, and you're embarrassed about the bad fruit that hangs on your tree. So you can actually start saying, well, I'll just cover it up with all these little fakey fruits. And the fakey fruits, people will see the fakey fruits, and then they won't see the real fruit of who I am. And in covering that up, everyone will be fooled. Everyone except God. So there is a fakey fruit kind of approach to doing things. It comes from this legalism, and it's mostly driven by impressing people, not by impressing God himself, because God still looks and sees the nasty fruit. This happens, for instance, if you make an enemy, quote unquote, with someone in your culture, and you never get along. In your private thoughts, you're thinking, I hate this person. They're so irritating. They get under my skin like nobody else does. I hate them. And then what happens when you see them? Hi, how are you today? False fruit goes on the front. Hi, you're looking great today. Great, well, have a great day. And you're sticking on stupid fruit. But the real fruit is still there. See? So that's what happens. There's the outside of you that you can manage to a certain degree for other people's purposes. But there's the inside of you that has fruit that just is a natural outgrowth. Do you want to know what your natural fruit is? What is it you do when no one's with you looking at you? When no one else is around, what do you do? That's your natural fruit. When other people are around, you stick on the false fruit. But when you're just all by yourself, that's your natural fruit. So no, we don't want to do this. That's a stupid approach. That's the legalism we've been talking about for a long time. The issue isn't trying to come up with a list of false fruit to cover our natural fruit. The issue is to be a different tree. That is, to walk by the Spirit. And he says another clue in this same passage. If you're led by the Spirit, then you're not under the law. And before we read John 15, he says you're led by the Spirit. So interestingly enough, the process of walking by the Spirit is to be led by his leading. So this implies very strongly, and we can show other passages, that the Spirit in you wants to lead you in a path of life. Wants to lead you there. And so really all we have to do is when we're in the midst of every step in life is to say, where are you going? Where are you going? I'll go that way. I want to be led by you in this circumstance. It's so much different than saying, well, I have this list of things I shouldn't do and I should do, so in this particular circumstance, what's on the list? No. Oh, there it is. I shouldn't, blah, 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 so I won't do that. No, he already said if you walk by the Spirit, that is, be led, if you allow the Spirit to lead you, you won't do all the nasty stuff on the right tree. So it's really, finding the right fruit in life is more about who you follow rather than what laws or legalisms you do. That's what it's really all about. And he's there, presumably, to want to lead us toward life. Okay? Jesus said it in John 15, abide in me and I in you. See, there's that in thing again. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. I'm the vine, you're the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Okay, so we're mixing our metaphors, apple trees and grapevines. But the point's very clear. In what Jesus is saying in John 15, what do? Do you make a list and do those things? No. You have one thing to do. And it's a word that starts with the letter A, and it's repeated, I don't know how many times in that passage. Abide. Well, you abide in him. And that's actually the same thing as walking in the Spirit, is abiding in him. Abiding is a word that comes from nomadic tribes, and nomadic tribes would pick up their tent and go someplace else and take their herds with them, and they'd eat at different places. As you kept moving around, you weren't abiding. But if you finally, as you were moving around, find an incredible place with infinite amount of water and wonderful pastures, they would say, I'm going to put my tent here and I'm staying. That's abide. It's a conscious contrast to flitting around all the time. And it's a conscious contrast to when we flit around, when we have things that tempt us, that look really good, like when you see all the car commercials in the Super Bowl. That looks great. That will change my life and finally make me happy. And we know that's a lie. But there's more things that are more suitable to you that you look at sometimes and say, I like that, and that'll make me happy. Well, that's not abiding in Jesus. That's flitting off, that's moving your tent someplace else to find life. He says, no, stay here. Stay here where you find life and water and nutrients. Stay here. And he says, when you do that, like a branch that's connected to a grapevine, when you do that, suddenly all the life that comes up through that vine enters into you as the branch, and fruit happens. And you don't have to try. Life, fruit. Okay, so that's what he's getting at. The whole point in the Christian life is not making a list and following it and trying to imitate Jesus. The issue is following his leading. That's what we do, led by the Spirit. So how can I tell whether I have good fruit or bad fruit? Which seems like a stupid question, but Paul's going to tell us right now, just in case you were wondering, what's a good tree look like? What's a bad tree? That's the next section in verse 19. So the deeds of the flesh, they're evident. It's like he's saying, I'm being Captain Obvious here. Everybody knows this, but here they are. Deeds of the flesh are evident, which are immorality, impurity, sensuality. Whoa. And you notice this first set is laid out. These are actually sexually oriented sins or lustfully oriented sins. I brought my cheat sheet when I was doing a lot of word studies on these because these come and go so fast. And the translators, English translators, have pretty good translations, but I thought I'd give you a little bit more. Behind the scenes Greek word, Steve. All right. Okay. So for instance, this immorality, impurity, sensuality, you know what the Greek word for immorality is? Porneia. Does that ring any bells? Pornography. Porneia. It's the entire realm of the misuse of sexuality is what it is. Immorality. The impurity, it comes from a word that means not clean, so you actually participate in it, and that leaves you not clean as a result. The sensuality right there is this word aselgia, which really means you're not reserved. Usually in most issues of sexuality, you're kind of reserved. You don't do that stuff in public, kind of thing. But in this particular case, he says, well, if you just release yourself to it and you're not reserved anymore, boom, that's that third word. You're just into it. We're going to do it. Woo! Craziness. Those are the sexually oriented ones. Those are the deeds of the flesh. That's what the flesh naturally goes toward. And there's another set here, these next two in verse 20, idolatry and sorcery. And the idolatry, we've talked about this before. Actually, if you look at the Greek word, it sounds like idolatry. Idolatria. So it's the idolatry's in there. But idolatry is any time you worship something that's not God. So it can be anything. For them, it couldn't be pagan false gods where you make this little golden head, like at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, that kind of guy. It can be little idols like that. Or it can be in our materialist culture, hey, that car will change my life. I'm going to get that and I'll finally be happy. I will worship it by giving it all my money. False. See, that's idolatry. So idolatry is anything that you worship in the sense that you give your resources to with an expectation that this thing will bless you and bring life. And God's the only one who should be in that position. So idolatry extends to more than just little pagan gods, so don't think you're off the hook. It extends to anything that you invest in heavily, expecting a return of life from. By the way, most elective sin that we get involved in, makes an idolatrous promise to us. It says, if you get involved in this, and you invest your life in this, I'll give you life in return. It's the lie in the Garden of Eden with Eve. Oh, when you eat that fruit, you won't die. You'll be like him finally. You'll be enlightened. It'll be good for you. Do this, it'll be good for you. So it's any time that you invest in things other than God. Anything that takes a higher priority than God in terms of bringing life to you. It can be misplaced trust in a career. It can be money. It can be misplaced expectations on a spouse. I see this especially when couples first get married. Especially, and I don't want to be harsh here, but especially on the part of the wife, of the fiancée wife, because she will, I hear this when I have conversations with premarital counseling, that's why I know this. She will look to him, and as we're having this premarital counseling, and she says, I say, why are you two getting married? And she'll look at him, and her eyes turn into these star things. And she says, well, because I love him. And I said, well, yeah, tell me what life is going to look like. Oh, it'll just be wonderful. I mean, we'll get married and it'll be wonderful. There's this, and her expectation, when I actually pull out and draw out the expectations, they are so incredibly high that he ought to be God, the way that she's expecting him to solve her life and to bring life to her. And so I actually have to confront many couples and say, you're bringing way too high an expectation. You're bringing to the expectation of this relationship something that really only God should be part of. Now, don't take me wrong. Marriage is great. And it's great on so many levels, and God invented it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you just got to understand that sometimes you can expect so much of your spouse, they're never going to succeed. And what you're expecting from your spouse, you really ought to be expecting from a relationship with God. And then we talk a lot about what that's all about. So anyway, idolatry, sorcery. Oh, this has got a great Greek word. See what this sounds like. The word in Greek is pharmakia. That we get the word pharmacy from? Exactly the same thing. Yeah, it strongly implies drugs, is what it is. In the King James, it's translated witchcraft right here, because witchcraft and drugs, that kind of spells, casting spells, that was, 17th century English, that's a big deal. Those are tied together. But it's really pharmakia, and from our perspective, it's drugs. It's any kind of altered state of consciousness that comes chemically. And we can really relate to that today. That's the sorcery part right here. So idolatry, you're worshiping something that's not a god, and then the sorcery, you're having life experiences based on chemical ingestion that make you see things and do crazy stuff. I had a guy who was a good friend of mine almost 35, 40 years ago. I haven't seen him for a while, but he had, through the hippie 60s, he's older than me, but through the hippie 60s, he worked at a think tank in California. They did research for different private contracted stuff, big think tank. And they were going to do some experiments on a new emerging drug called LSD. And to see exactly what they knew it was working its way through culture and through the hippie stuff, but it had such remarkably different effects on people that they said, we need some volunteers inside the think tank to just do an experimental take of LSD, and we'll just document what you do, and you can tell us what it's all about. So he raised his hand and said, hot dog, this would be great. Worst decision of his entire life, he said. Worst decision of his entire life. And he's a believer, and he told me about the experiences that he had for almost 48 hours. I mean, totally, it just blew him away for 2 days. But then something would recur on a regular basis, at first monthly and then yearly, and to this very day, and he's in his early 70s, he still gets weird, they call it flashbacks back then, but it's weird psychotropic effects from this experiment that he did back in the late 60s. Now that's pharmakia, okay? And we're not meant to be in those experiences. But interestingly enough, that's where our natural fruit goes. Because we say in our hearts, life is not as good as I thought it was going to be. Maybe I can deaden this somehow by getting a new experience that's easy. Let's go drugs. And so that's where we go. A friend of mine who died from drugs back in the early 70s he had experimented with LSD. And he told me at the time, he said, I'm doing this thing that they call blue dots. And blue dots were, they would distribute LSD on a small little white piece of paper, blotter paper, like, a coffee filter paper. And well, it would be a little square, about 2 inches square. And they would put one drop of LSD in the center of this piece of paper, and it would make a little blue dot right in the center of the paper. And that was too much drug, so then they'd take a razor blade, and they'd cut the paper into quarters, so you only got a quarter of a blue dot. And so when you bought your blue dot, I'm instructing you how to take drugs, aren't I? And when you bought your blue dot, you'd take this little piece of paper with the blue dot on the tip and just run it across your tongue, and that would make you trip out for 2 days.
A lot of times, though, it was laced with arsenic.
Yeah, had bad stuff in it. So that's where our natural man goes, he says. Other bad fruits. Well, how about this? Here's a big long list, and this has more to do with your relationships with other people and how that goes bad. And I think any of us who ever have had contact with other human beings knows that it doesn't go easy. And when your tree is consumed with serving you rather than serving someone else, this is the result. Enmities, which really just means hatred. It's called hatred in King James, and that's a great translation. But it's the same kind of hatred, not just that you're irritated with people, but it's the same very strong hatred word you use for your mortal enemies who do atrocities to you and your friends and family and people. It's that kind of, it's a very strong word. So that's a natural fruit that we do. We just start hating people. Strife, which is more about contention and debating and intentionally quarreling and taking the opposite side on everything. That's a natural part. By the way, this is something that the Spirit's been working out of me for a while. Really? You seem like a nice guy. Well, it manifests in so many different ways, this strife, this contention. But at home with Dorothy and I, many times we'll see something or look at something and we'll look at it differently, and she'll say one thing and I'll think, that's really not true. It's really this way. Because basically I have better insight than she does. And she doesn't really know about this kind of thing. So no, honey, that's not the way it is. It's really like this. Trust me, I know. And she'd say, no, it's like this. And I can see it with my own 2 eyes. Well, honey, no, that's not because, trust me, I know more about it. And you know how this ratchets up? And it goes into a deliberate quarrel. And I basically had to tell myself, Jim, you may not know everything. And once I got off that, then, God was really pretty brutal with me about this. He says, you may be right, but you're quarreling with it. And it doesn't really matter if you're right. It doesn't matter if this issue is right in this particular sense. Now, in important stuff, we'll duke it out. But these are about stupid things. Stupid things. And we automatically ratchet up to this word. That's the strife. That's the quarreling. We like to be right and to engage and win. Right? That's what this word is. So that's a natural fruit. The next word there is jealousy, and that's a great translation. It's actually the word zealous. Have you heard the word zeal and zealous? You notice how it looks like jealous? That's because that's the Greek word. It's actually, it's zelos, it's zealous. And zealous means to have a passion about something. Well, this is a passion about someone else doing something you don't think is right, that you think you ought to be deserving. So it's that kind of heated thing. It literally, zelos in Greek literally means superheated. So when you put a kettle on the stove and you turn on the heat underneath it, it becomes zealous when it makes the steam start to whistle. That's zealous. That's zealousness. That literally means heat, is what it is. Another natural fruit, outbursts of anger. King James, wrath. Both really good translations. It's the word thumos, which you get from breathing really hard. They used to talk about horses that worked really hard, or oxen that worked really hard. When you started to overwork them, you would see this snorting. This kind of, it literally means this kind of snorting is what it means. It means hot breath going in and out. And when you make somebody angry and they get angry and angry and angry at you, they start snorting. It's literally what this word means. So think about someone who is so stinking angry, they're breathing on you so hard. Or if you make an animal unhappy with you, my brother tells a story about coming across a moose in Alaska and surprising it. And he was 6'1", and the moose was taller than him. So he's looking up, and he says, my most vivid memory of this moose, by the way, it was a cow, and the calves were nearby. My most vivid memory was this thing coming out of the bush, and we're looking face to face, about 10 feet apart, and it's snorting at me. So when you think this word, think that angry. That's what we're talking about, literally, thumos. Outbursts of anger. So this is really anger, not hidden and being pleasant, but anger that comes out and explodes on people, snortingly, okay? Disputes. This is pretty much the same thing as contention. King James calls it strife, but again, it's another version of of always battling with one another, having to always be right, and taking it down to the mat to make sure it happens that way. Disputes. It's just like the strife. The next one up there is dissensions. I love this word. It actually means two things. The dis comes from the word in Greek that means two, and the last half of it is this word stasis, which means to stand. So it's two standings. It's two standings. So dissensions are really when an issue comes up, and it might be the issue that they're dealing with in Galatia. An issue comes up, and some people stand here, and some people stand here. Two standings. That's the dissensions. And many times it can be over trivial issues. Now, let me be clear. There are some issues that are extraordinarily important for us to take a stand on. They're biblically informed. It's not a matter of interpretation. And you need to go to the mat on those things. These are essentials that we talk about in the scriptures. But then there's some things, it really doesn't matter. Really. What color was Jesus' robe, his cloak that he wore every day? Well, I think it was natural and it wasn't colored at all. Well, I think it might have actually been colored kind of yellow. I think they do it. Well, I don't think so because and then you ratchet it all up. And you come in on a conversation like that with two people doing it, and you're saying, stop. It doesn't make any difference at all.
Isn't it purple?
It's purple. So there are a whole host of things that we argue over that the first question you have to ask is this really important? Is the outcome of this really that important? Really? And if you've raised kids, you've probably gone through the whole process of picking your battles, I can confront about this. I can confront about it, or I can sort of let this go. It depends on how we're going to conserve our energy in these discussions. How do we pick our battles? Is it really important for me to get all over her case because she's doing this when it's just not that big a deal? But there are big deals. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have some kind of two stances in issues, but on a lot of issues, it's just a waste of time and divisive. Factions right there. The King James actually literally says the word heresies right here because the Greek word is heresies. That's a perfect Greek pronunciation of the word heresies. So what he's talking about here isn't so much the doctrine that's heretical, but the fact that you have groups that believe heresies. You see, he's talking about this interaction between groups. Throughout the New Testament, this word is half used for the groups, the people that believe the heresy, and half it's about the actual doctrine itself. It's never distinguished. In fact, a whole body of people then in these two stands are distinguished by what they believe. That's the heresies. So he says you can believe wrong stuff, and that's our natural bent is to believe wrong stuff. These factions grow up as a result. And then finally, this envying, that's a really good translation. It really means not so much to be jealous of a person, but to envy the stuff that they have, and you want it instead. So it should come to you. Okay, there's another section that comes right after this, right here. And these kind of group together, drunkenness and carousing. Those are actually both alcohol related. So that's why he groups them together like that. Drunkenness really means just intoxication. And we talked last week and a couple weeks before about the fact that biblically there's no warrant to to say that alcohol is wrong, but intoxication clearly is. So there's a self-control issue. The word in Greek for this is interesting. It's methe. It sounds like meth. So it's really general intoxication is what it is. That's drunkenness. And carousing is what happens when you've drunk too much. When you're actually out of control. The King James says this word is revelings, not a bad translation actually. It literally means, it comes from a word that means to just let yourself go. Like if I was going to do the Greek word here, if I let myself go, what I'd do is just fall on the ground and get flat. So this is really just letting yourself go to what the drunkenness does. You're suggestible. You do anything. That's what it is. It's a great Greek word. Carousing and revelings is what happens, but what it really is you have chosen, because you've allowed the intoxication to take over you, you allow yourself to kind of do anything, and you just let go. Okay? That's what he's talking about here. So it's very characteristically tied to alcohol. That's our natural fruit. If you're left alone in the world, those are the things you do. And as G.K. Chesterton said, there's nothing that can be so easily confirmed in Scripture about the fact of man except something like this. The sinfulness of man and his innate ability to sin like that is easily confirmed. That's just our natural fruit. That's where we go. And things like these. So it's like he said, I got a bunch bigger list of bad stuff, but I'm not going to go there. Things like these, of which I forewarn you, just as I have forewarned you, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. So we shouldn't do those things, right? Don't go the list route again. What he's saying is, it's better translated, the people who are doing these things are not going to the kingdom. That's what he's saying. That is, if your tree is such kind of tree that makes that kind of fruit, you're not going to heaven. You're not going to the kingdom if you naturally make that kind of fruit. There's got to be some kind of transformation. So by their fruits you will know them. What's your fruit look like? Is it like this? Well, then the kingdom is not going to be part of you. And he says right there that those who practice these things, and that word's very specific. He doesn't say anyone who ever does any of these things, but people who are committed to pursue these things. That's what that practice word means. So your life is committed toward those things. That's the way you go. That's your natural fruit. And our culture today is largely like that. They say, look, I look inside of me, I look at the way I'm made, and what I need to do is eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow I'm going to die. So I might as well just go for the limit and just grab everything I can grab, the gusto and all that kind of stuff from this old beer commercial. I'm just going to do that because that's what I'm made and that's what's going to make me happy. And that's the fruit that's natural to the way I'm made. I'm just going to do it. Woo-hoo! Drink, carouse, sexual sin, because that's the way I'm made. And an honest person will say that seems like what I naturally go toward. That's practicing it. It's not just falls from time to time. That's practicing it. I mean, there's things on this list that come very close to things that I find myself tripping into all the time. All the time. Now, does God say you're not coming home because of that? No, But I don't pursue those things. But still, there's a part of my flesh that's popping out bad fruit. And I get frustrated with that. And I talk to God about that all the time and say, God, you need to continue to change that because I can't change it. It's fruit that's natural to this flesh. I want to follow the Spirit. I want to follow you. So we talked about that last week. So no, people who practice these things, they're not going to inherit the kingdom. James makes it very clear. So what's the source of the quarrels and conflicts among you? Those are the same words that are used in two places in this passage. What's the source of that? Is not the source your pleasures that wage war in your members? You lust and you don't have, so you commit murder. You're envious and you cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. He goes on and says right after that, if you're a believer, if you're following the Lord, ask and pray. You're not asking and praying. But this is why these things are natural fruit, because when you're the center of the universe, you want these things, and if the universe doesn't participate in your centrality and providing you all these things to make you happy, then you fight and quarrel. You literally try and manhandle the world and the people around you to get it, to satisfy you. And that's why we have that stuff. James is really clear on that. Now, as that was kind of a bummer, let me just tell you that this tree has a fatal disease. And this tree's fatal disease is that it's stuck in narcissism. Sin. Narcissism is self-love, is all it is. I'm at the center of my universe. A narcissist thinks this about themselves all the time. Everything's about me. Everything's about me. And that's the tragic disease of the trees of humanity that happened at the fall. We are stuck on ourselves. We are stuck in narcissism. We can't help it, but we love and serve ourselves when, as creatures of the Creator, we're supposed to love and serve the Creator. But we are stuck on loving and serving ourselves. The key transformation of regeneration when you follow the Lord is that he turns your interest away from you and loving you to loving him and his kingdom and the people that he loves, the people that are around us. That's why the entire law is summed up in you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and others as yourself. So see, it's really the whole Christian idea is turning away from sin, which is being stuck in narcissism. It's all about me. And when you fill a universe, when you fill a world with people who are wearing the same badge, it's all about me, you're going to have conflicts. You only have to put two people in a room. You only have to put two people in a marriage to realize that you can't both wear this badge.
Anybody ever watched the TV show House?
House? Oh, yeah.
He is so...
Yeah. So it really can't be about you. That's why throughout the entire New Testament, Jesus is saying, you know what? There's real life in sacrificial love. And love is all about living for the benefit of another, not you. It's the great paradox of God's creation of us is that when we stop pursuing things for ourselves and we start pursuing the best of others, we gain the most in us. Yeah. It's the oddest paradox, but it's really, really true. And we'll see it in just a second. So stuck in narcissism, that's the disease. Okay, let's go to the positive side. So how about the spirit side? Well, he goes on in verse 22, and he says this. The fruit of the Spirit. Okay, yay! By the way, he doesn't say the fruit of a good person. He says the fruit of the Spirit. And remember how fruit reveals the true nature, the hidden inside of something? So what he's saying is that the fruit that's going to show up now is evidence that there's a spirit living inside of you. It's not the fact that you're a good person and trying to make yourself good. A radical difference here. Okay, so the fruit of the Spirit is this. Love, joy, and peace. Well, those are pretty easy. Love is agape. That's a New Testament word that means sacrificial love. And in fact, agape has more to do with covenant love, with a promise to love, than necessarily about, birds and unicorns and rainbows and stuff like that when you get married. It's really the whole, it takes a lot of the sizzle out of it, but love from a New Testament, from agape position says, basically, I don't care what you say or do to me. I have committed myself to always loving you, and you can never stop my love for you. It's a commitment. It's a devotion. There's an equivalent word in the Old Testament Hebrew called chesed. Chesed. And chesed is the same thing. And when you see it in the Old Testament, it's usually translated loyal love because it's more of a dedication. It's more of a devotion. It's not just I feel love for you, man. It's more like, no. Your benefit is going to be my top priority forever. And it's not about me. It's not about me. That's why in a marriage it's so beautiful. When you do it biblically, you have two people who say, it's not about me, it's not about me, it's about your best. I'm going to live for you. And then suddenly you're living in a life of mutual love. And in this mutual love, someone else is constantly delighted to see to your best at the same time. It's like living a life of gifts from each other in that sense. But when you live with the life of the marriage, the two people say, it's all about me, and you exist in this marriage to make me happy, you need to come over my way and make me happy. Why aren't you making me happy? Because the other person will say, well, you exist to make me happy. And you see, you're always going to work yourself apart. But when you have two people who live for each other's best, it's a life of continuous giving. It's a radically different thing. Okay, love, joy. Joy is misunderstood in the New Testament perspective. It's the same. It's this word chara that we get charis and charismatic from. But chara means just sort of a calm delight. It's not a jumping up and down. Oh, I've got that joy. It's not quite like that. It's even in the midst of horrible circumstances to sit back in your chair, take another sip of coffee, and say, it's going to work out just fine. The Lord loves me. What can separate me from the love of Christ? Anything? Anything? Nothing. So it's really that calm delight. He loves me, and he'll never let me go. What can separate me from his love? Nothing. Nothing. So that's what joy is. It's this settledness about life, even especially contrasted in the midst of chaos. Peace. When you see peace in the Bible, and New Testament especially, peace means not at war. When you have two factions that are at war, when you have peace, it's not a cessation of violence. It's a fact that the two have become one. That's what it means. There's nothing separating you. And that's why there's no war anymore. So peace is really a sense of unity, if you want to put it in cosmic terms, that there really is nothing between you and others or between you and God. There's nothing there. There's nothing for us to go to war about because we're that way. And it principally, when you see it here, it principally means peace with God. There's nothing between us. So there's love, joy, peace. These are natural fruits of the Spirit. This is what the Spirit will do automatically through you when you are led by the Spirit. He says patience, kindness, goodness. Patience, kindness, goodness. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not a patient person. So every time I see patience come out of me, I go, man, that's not me. That's the Spirit working through me. It comes from this word macrothumia. The thumia we saw already before as the, remember the snorting? That's the thumia. That's the thumos stuff. Macro means the same thing we use the word macro for now. Instead of just big, it actually means long in Greek. So in a real sense, what this patience means is it means you have this long suffering, because that same word thumia is also used when people are in pain. So what he's saying is that, in fact, if your Bible says long suffering, that's a literal translation of the Greek word. You go long, you go the distance. You go the distance, and it's not about suffering for the other person, but it's about saying, I'm going to stick in here for the long span. I'm not going to be offended easily. I'm going to be patient with this person. And there's no guarantees about when I'm going to have to stop being patient, when they're going to finally turn around and quit being such an irritant to me. It's saying, no, I'm in this for the long haul, macrothermia, for the long haul. Kindness and goodness look like the same words. That's why it's interesting to kind of go through these. Kindness in King James, they call this gentleness. Neither one is really a very good translation. If you went out right now and you got a job down the street at the grocery store, bagging groceries, you would instantly become Christos, employed. This word means you are employable. It means you're useful. It means you're engaged doing good things. It means you're actively engaged in people's lives. You're not separated. You're useful to the king to love, is what this means. So kindness here, gentleness, King James, it means that you're engaged for good, and really engaged for good in other people's lives. Really, really good. I see this when I do funerals all the time. You hear people talk about the person who passed away, and they'll talk about, let me tell you about the time that this person was Christos, engaged, employed for my benefit. Let me tell you examples of that. So that's really what this is all about. It's about that. I see people who have funerals who never really engaged with people. They lived as hermits most of their lives. And they said, I'm just happy if I never have to talk to another person in my entire life. They're not Christos with anyone. They're never employed on the behalf of anyone's life. They're never engaged. And it's sad. Those funerals are sad. But this is what he's saying. The natural fruit of the Spirit is for you to be engaged in other people's lives for good. That's this word, kindness. I love that. That was just I had never known that when I looked at this passage. So what's goodness? Goodness comes from the same word that we get for the root for the name Agatha. Agatha Christie. Agatha means good. Beneficial. Beneficence. So that's this goodness right here. So the word before that, the kindness, is engaged beneficially. And what are you engaged for? Goodness in their lives. The Agathosun. So that's what that is. So patience, kindness, goodness, you're engaged in the lives of other people for their good, and you're patient when they're idiots. By the way, you're patient because you're waiting for an opportunity to be engaged for their good. That's what that's all about. Okay, finally he says faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Faithfulness, the same word we use throughout the entire New Testament. It's this word pistis, and it's like a legal word that means to go into court and to be finally persuaded about a thing and hold to it, to be convinced about something. So faith is really to be convinced based on evidence and hearing and all that stuff, to be convinced so that you can actually take that confidence and extrapolate out what's going to happen next. And so when someone does carry out what they say they're going to do, you can say that they have faithfully carried it out because I knew their character, I have a full expectation that's what they'll do, and they did it. So pistis is really about being confident about a thing and then concretely hopeful for where that goes. That's what faith is all about. It's an extension, like a bridge, it's an extension from the foundation of what you know and what you have heard and seen, and from that you can actually extend that. So when we see Jesus coming and doing his 3-year ministry and we see what he's like We read about what he's like. We hear about the first-hand testimonies. That lays a concrete foundation on this pier at the end of the bridge. And I can say now I have faith in him, a confident expectation based on what I already know about him. That's faith. That's faith. So it's to be persuaded. It's dependable. And that's what the Spirit is in our life. It actually produces that kind of confident expectation of things that you can't see but are going to happen anyway. It's the evidence of things not seen. Okay? And that's what he says in Hebrews 11:1. Gentleness. King James calls this meekness. Both pretty good translations. It means how you consider yourself. Do you consider yourself as really hot stuff, really high and elevated, really better than anyone else, more insightful in issues like I was with Dorothy, so I always argued out of her positions? When I was wrong a lot of times. Or do you see yourself kind of just here? Humility is just not too high, not too low, just what you are. That's just who I am. That's just who I am. So this gentleness is really interacting with people based on an honesty about just who you are. No pretension of being bigger, no false humility about being smaller. Yeah, just me. What you see is what you get. That's what that word gentleness is. And then self-control. Self-control. King James calls this temperance. How many people use the word temperance this week? I didn't. But back in the 17th century and through to here, temperance is a perfect word for this. If it was still part of our vernacular, it's a great word. It means literally in Greek to be strong in a thing. Literally. So when you're strong in a thing, it strongly implies that you master the thing. You're not going to let it push you around. You're going to be strong in that thing. So that's why self-control, it's really a pretty good translation. It means to be strong in the things, these appetites that want to get up and control us. And we say, no. Temperance and tempered really means the same thing. When something comes up, you say, no, you are not going to master me. I've got you. I'm mastering you. I'm going to be strong in that thing. No, self-control. Which, interestingly, it's an amazing part of this list, I think, because what it says is that it implies the fact that there are things inside of you and outside of you that will tempt you in certain directions. They'll say, come on, this will change your life. And you, because of the Spirit inside, you can go, I'm not going to let you master me. So literally, there's a real choice now in the midst of these temptations that we didn't have before. Before, remember, he said in the other fruit of the other tree, he said, you let yourself go. And, your ability to self-control and to moderate is only partially successful, and most of the times when no one's watching, totally unsuccessful. But the Spirit brings self-control over those things that really want to bring death, not life in your life. These are the fruits of the Spirit. And then as we kind of conclude here, against such things there's no law. Remember, we've been talking about following the law like a legalism. You don't have to follow the law anymore because these things will be natural fruit in your life. You don't have to add to your legalism list, today I will be patient with Bill, because the Spirit will provide that patience if you're led by that Spirit. I remember, I think I've told this story before, but this was a remarkable aha to me. When I was working in industry, there was this guy who used to come over to my desk and bug me incessantly. Bug me. He was a new employee and he had no friends, and so he'd come over in our open cubicles and just lean over the wall. While I'm just really busy. I'm really busy. And all of your body language is telling you that you're really busy. You're not even making eye contact. And he's not picking it up. Bug me. And he would do this every single day, over and over and over and over. I was so impatient with this guy. I mean, I was on the verge of, picking up all my pencils and throwing them at him, saying, get out of here, I got better things to do, because he wouldn't even come and talk about anything important. I'm getting angry thinking about it. One day, when he left and he went back to his cubicle, I remember praying and said, God, I'm irritated. All good Psalms tell God what you're feeling. I'm irritated. But I don't want to be irritated. I want to be able to, with this guy, I want to be able to push past that and do something beneficial in his life. I don't want to just label him as pest and leave that label on him for the rest of his life. But I can't do this. My flesh, it is not patient. I just can't deal with this guy. And so, in a flash, while I'm praying this, God says, now this isn't audible, but I heard it. God says, then you need to start going over to his cubicle. I said, no. No, that'll just encourage him and he'll be even more. No! I can see my pencil going across my table. No, I'm not going to do that. And and then as the hour passed and I'm working on other stuff, I'm thinking, well, I did pray and that came, I don't know. Let's give it a whirl. So the next day, in mid-morning, when he usually came around that time, I got up and went to his cubicle. And I leaned over the wall in his cubicle, said, hey, Dave, how's it going, man? Great, Jim. Thanks for coming and seeing me today. You want to get some coffee? We go over and get some coffee. I mean, it was so different because instead of being a pest, he was suddenly extraordinarily grateful because no one else would talk to him. And so I found out as I did this on a regular basis, I persisted in it, I found out Dave got to become a very pleasant guy and didn't irritate me. He was really a very nice guy who've become friends to this very day. I mean, that was like 30 years ago when that started. So it's interesting that God had the solution. And in that then, as I started going over to Dave's cubicle, I found my heart changing from one of just being tolerant of the pest and not wanting to encourage the pest to being genuinely interested in what his life is doing. How does that happen? That's a spirit living inside you. That's a new piece of fruit. That fruit popped out, and I went, well, go figure. That's the patience. That's the long suffering. That's what that is. There's no law against that.
That's why when you pray, you do what you
When you pray, you better watch out for the answers, actually.
Well, and you better step in there, because if you're praying and you've got the Holy Spirit speaking to you,
Yeah.
And a lot of times you'll sit there and say, well, yeah, but.
Yeah, but. I think that's why these revelations are just so great, because you go, man, I wouldn't have generated that in a million years. Really? I mean, it's brilliant. Which tells me it doesn't come from me. It doesn't come from my tree. It comes from some other DNA inside me, and that's the Spirit. Okay, we need to close. 24. Now, those who belong to the Messiah, Jesus, they've crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. So this whole tree has actually been crucified and dead, and all the flesh and its passions and desires. It's been crucified. In a sense, what he's saying metaphorically is it's really dead and has no power of a living thing over you. It doesn't have to throw you around. It doesn't have to control you. It's literally dead. Now, it may pop up every now and then trying to resurrect itself, but you can turn to it and point it and say, you're dead. Go away. I want that. And there's power over that. It strongly implies that before the Spirit inside of you, there was no power over that. And that's substantiated with other passages as well. It's crucified. It's the flesh and its passions and desires. It's gone. So if we live by the Spirit, let's walk by the Spirit. He's making a very simple case here about the fact that we came to Christ through the work of the Spirit. If the Spirit's responsible for our stance now in Christ, then continue to walk by the Spirit. You started with the Spirit, keep going in the Spirit. I mean, walk every day in the Spirit. And let's not become boastful or challenging one another or envying one another. That's back to the old fruit. That's stuff that doesn't have to be there. If you are led by the Spirit, if you do like what I did with Dave and say, I prayed and said, I don't want to be here. My next step in this walk would be to yell at him and throw pencils at him next time I see him. And I don't want to go that way. Lord, how do you want to go? And he shows you. And he empowers you to do it. It's a radical life change. And by the way, I got to add this really quickly. I've talked to people over the years who say, well, your Christian thing, they're not Christians, your Christian thing is all about what it takes to get to heaven. It's all about later. It's not about now. Well, when you look at these two trees, it's about now. It's about now, because I would rather live with the fruit of that tree than the fruit of that tree.
Jesus even said, behold, the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Is at hand.
That's now,
Kingdom of heaven is
here,
at hand.
This moment, now.
He's in the business of regenerating you so that the fruits of the Spirit are part of your life rather than the fruits of the flesh. And that's now. That's a now thing. So let me finish with the county jail.
That looks familiar.
That's the Spokane County Jail. The windows are not big enough that you can crawl through them. That's why they're little slits like that. And when you go inside of the county jail, it looks kind of like this. They have open areas and seating, and the guys are usually in their rooms. And they come out for a little time, I think twice a day, to come into the commons area. The guard who watches over them sits on that desk on the left, on the right there. And so I went there with a couple other guys. At the time, we were doing routine ministry in jails and talking to people. And I would go with my guitar. That guitar right there, actually. I'd go in and we'd lead some music, do a little mini church service, and someone would say something. But that particular day, only 1 or 2 of the inmates could come out because everyone else was left in their cell because they'd done bad things. So there was 2, 3, 4 guys, something like that. It was usually just a crowd of people. So we didn't have our service in that little open space like we normally do. Instead, we just decided, well, we're here, we're in the jail, we might as well spend some time here. So me and another fella just sat there on one of these little tables and just waited to see if some of the guys who would get up and come out would talk to us. And we told them, we're here, you can just chat if you want. And this one guy came over, ostensibly to admire my guitar. and as he sat there, he said after he admired my guitar for a while and did a little small talk, he said, "You're the church guys, right?" "Yeah, we're the church guys." He said, I need something desperately. And I said, "Well, tell me what's going on." And the one thing you don't ask when you go into jail, by the way, you don't ask people why they're there. Didn't know that, did you? You don't ask. So I said, what are you dealing with is what I asked. And so he actually brought it up. He says, "I'm here because I keep beating my old lady," quote unquote. "I keep beating my old lady. And last time I did it in this rage, it almost put her in the hospital. And now I'm here this time because it did put her in the hospital." And he says, I don't know what's wrong with me. And I said, "Do you love this woman?" He says, "Oh, with all my heart. But you beat her." "Yeah, what's up with that?" And he was genuinely confused about the fruit of his life. That's what he was telling me. And he said, "I would give anything. I'd give anything if for some reason I wasn't always beating up my old lady. But I don't know the answer. Do you know the answer?" I said, "Well, I think I do." I said to him, "What do you need more than anything else?" And he said, "I need self-control." Bing! And I thought, the fruits of the Spirit. So I said, "Hey, check this out." So I pulled out my Bible and I said, "Listen to this. The fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control." And as soon as I said self-control, he said, "Oh, that's it. I need that more than anything else." And I slammed the book shut and I said, "Well, sorry, you can't have it." He said, "Why? Why can't I have it?" I said, "Because that's a fruit of the Spirit of God living within you. There's nothing I can tell you magically in this book that you can somehow recreate that in your life and you'll stop beating up your old lady. That's something that happens when God's Spirit lives in you. And then it's a natural part of your life. Natural. He works at, it's his job to will and to do his good pleasure. He does it in you. But you know what? Unless you have him in you, all bets are off. And he says, so if I give my life, he had it figured out, if I give my life to God, if I give him all that I am, you're telling me that he will come and live inside me and he'll start changing the stuff on the outside of my life? I said, exactly. And then we talked more about sin, about the fact that, man, you are stuck on yourself. You think everything is about you. You are stuck in narcissism. I didn't tell him that, but I said, it's all about you, isn't it? Of course it's all about me. Well, in this whole system, it's not about you anymore. It's about him. And once he's inside of you, this fruit will start being there. And you'll stop beating up the old lady. And a whole bunch of other extraordinary things that I love and enjoy. And when we went back to the rest of the list, he said, well, I want those things too. And I said, do you know what Jesus called this list of things? He called this abundant life. And he says, that's what I need. Because he says, on my own, I do the most horrible things. Who will save me from this body of sin is what Paul the Apostle said. And this guy was saying the same thing in front of me. And he says, what do I have to do? And I said, it's very simple. You just need to give your life to him and say, I'm done trying to do this on my own. I'm done. Everything I put my hands on turns into dust and decay and junk. I'm riddled with sin. And I come to him to pay the price. We talked about the cross, talked all about that stuff. And he says, I'm in. I'm all in. I want abundant life. And if that life can only come from God, my Creator, I'm going to him and I'm running with my arms open. Now, this is a guy that was missing most of his front teeth because he'd been in several bar fights where someone picked up a pool cue and swung it at his head and he lost all his front teeth. He told me this too. Big long hair, scraggy black beard, one gimpy eye. And he says, I need God. So right there on one of those little round chairs, we prayed. Because I said the magic word, self-control. A tiny piece of the huge picture of abundant life that can only come as a natural fruit of a transformed, resident spirit inside you. Not for the future, but for right now. For right now, he regenerates us. And he frees us from the fruit of narcissism and brings us to the fruit of the Spirit.
When you look at God's fingerprints all over that whole
Yeah,
thing,
yeah. You see his fingerprints everywhere.
with the inmates being,
Yep.
was he just being just
The wonderful thing about prison ministry is that people know that they got problems when they're in prison. So you can get past that part really fast. People who aren't in prison say, I don't have any problems. So it's a wonderful thing. They're needy and they want life. And they've done everything they can do to try and squeeze it out of their tree, and all they get is junk. And that's an easy case to make with them that, yeah, you need God. The people who walked and saw Jesus in his 3-year ministry weren't in love with the fact that he was promising them citizenship in the kingdom of heaven. Oh, that was part of it. They fell in love with him because in his presence there was life. And his presence transformed them as well. And that's all we're doing here. Okay, let's quit. Father, we thank you again for this incredible word. We thank you that you, at the moment that we asked to be part of your family, you moved in with your Spirit into us. Like the Apostle Paul says, our bodies themselves are like temples, the places where God himself lives in his Spirit. And so we pray that you would give us more understanding of this. Lord, admittedly, a lot of this seems very mysterious. I mean, what do I do if your Spirit is at work inside me to regenerate and to create this new fruit? Show us what we do in terms of walking with your Spirit, being led by your Spirit. Or as Jesus said in John 15, abiding in Jesus. I mean, how do we do that? How do we continue to do that? Because, Lord, we're convinced of the fact, it's been demonstrated in our lives, that left to ourselves, we create the worst fruit possible. And even despite what we know the fruit's supposed to look like, we're just not really very successful at forcing it on the limbs of our lives. But, Lord, we have found life in you. Your Spirit has come inside us to live within us, to dwell within us, to commune with us, to give us understanding of the immensity of your loving kindness toward us and your patience toward us. And you are actually changing us from the inside out. Thank you for your great loving kindness. In Jesus' name, amen.